Doctors tell us that taking a walk every day is one of the best things that you can do for your health. They said that if you do this, you can actually prevent many of the major illnesses that are endemic in society today. Now, my dad was an early adopter of this. Far before it was fashionable to take a daily walk, that's what my dad did. In fact, as far as I could remember, Dad took his daily walk. And I think he knew that it was not just good for his physical health, but given the fact that he was raising 6 children, I think he knew it was good for his mental health as well, too. But it wasn't just the health benefits of his walk that Dad liked to expound upon. In fact, one of the things that he liked to teach all of his children was that our feet were our most dependable form of transportation. See, he was ex-Army. They marched a lot. And he could walk 20 miles no problem in his Army days. And he told us that, look, there may not be a car available to go where you want to go. The buses may not be on schedule or broken down. You need to be able to walk. And to prove to me that I could walk anywhere, in the summer before my freshman year in high school, he said, all right, Dave, we're going to walk to your high school. This was not the local neighborhood public high school. I went to the Catholic high school, 7.5 miles away. So after a fortifying breakfast one Saturday morning, Dad and I sat out, and we made it in a little under 2 hours. And after refreshing ourselves with a hearty drink of water from the school water fountain, we reversed our course to complete our 15-mile round trip. Dad liked to walk. But as Dad grew older, he began to understand some of the other values of walking. You see, that became his prayer time. Every day he would go out for a walk, and he would tell us he was taking a walk with God. He was going to go out and pray. And in his walk, it wasn't just saying the rosary or any of the formatic prayers that we have, all of which are good. Dad had a conversation with God. And he would tell him everything that was going well in life that he appreciated, and he would tell him the things that were troubling him. And one of the most touching stories that I have about my father was what was said by the priest at the homily of Dad's funeral. He said that Gene liked to take a daily walk with God. And one day when they finished their walk, they were a little bit closer to God's house than Dad's house. And so God simply invited him to stay. It's no surprise then that on that weekend following the Friday funeral, as all of my brothers and sisters were gathered at our parents' house together, the way we processed this is we went out for individual walks with each other to share how we were feeling, to share our sorrow, and to come to grips with the loss of our father, who we all loved deeply. And yet one of the things that every one of us knew is that even in the midst of our sorrow and loss, God was walking with us. In today's gospel reading, we hear about another famous scriptural walk, and that is the road to Emmaus. I consider this the second most memorable travelogue in all of Scripture. The first, of course, was that aimless 40-year ramble by the Israelites in the desert. But this one from the Gospel in Luke is a lot more direct. We have 2 disciples that have a very specific destination, or so it tells us. It says they are walking the 7 miles to the town of Emmaus. Now, Scripture scholars and archaeologists have not actually been able to identify what the town of Emmaus was that they were going to. But I would suggest to you that's not important, because the key motivator for the journey is they were getting out of town. They were leaving Jerusalem because they had just witnessed the person who was most important in their life, their rabbi, their friend, their presumed Messiah who was going to restore the nation of Israel to its greatness. They had watched him get arrested, tried, tortured, and crucified. And they were afraid they might be next. So Cleopas and his friend, they were heading out of town. Let's get out of Jerusalem before they get us. But even in their despair, in their sorrow, and in their fear, Scripture tells us they didn't walk alone, because Jesus joined them on the journey. Now, one of the interesting aspects of this story is it says that they didn't recognize Jesus. Well, how does that even make sense, right? It was their best friend. It was the person that they hung around with all the time. Now, Scripture doesn't give us a specific clue to that. But I would suggest to you, and this is only Deacon Dave's theology, not ratified by any of the great theologians in the Catholic Church, but I think their eyes were blinded by their sorrow and their despair and their hopelessness. They were so preoccupied by that they couldn't see the one in their life who brought joy and hope and life. And Jesus walked with them, and he listened to them, and he listened to all their concerns and complaints. And then what did he do? He explained to them why it was necessary. As a side note, you may notice that I make a very intentional decision in how I read that scripture. For when Jesus is chastising them and saying, "Oh, you foolish of heart," I don't think Jesus would have said that like, "You bad children." I think his heart was breaking at the time. I felt like a good parent. He was feeling sorry for them. And he simply wanted to comfort them so that they could walk more positively on their journey. Of course, we know that they eventually recognized him in the breaking of the bread. Now, those two disciples on the road to Emmaus are not the only two disciples that Jesus walks with. He walks with every one of us on life's journey as well. There are times when it's very easy to recognize that God is walking with us on the journey, and that's normally when things are going pretty well. We're on the mountaintop. The family's happy. The kids are not fighting. The job is going well. We have everything we need, and it's easy to thank God for our blessings. It's easy to see God in that moment. But we all know that life isn't always that way. Even when you're young, there are times where things don't go well with your friends, right? Or you didn't quite get the grade you wanted at school, or your parents are upset at you. Every one of us faces those moments when we're not on the mountaintop, but we're in the valley, sometimes in very serious ways. But the key understanding to this reading is even when we are in those moments of despair and sorrow and hopelessness and fear, that Jesus is still walking with us. When we have broken relationships in our family and in our life, Jesus still walks with us. When we have long periods of unemployment, Jesus still walks with us. When we're suffering from chronic or intense illness, Jesus still walks with us. When someone in our family has died or a close friend has died and we are grieving the loss, Jesus still walks with us. And when we are having a personal crisis of faith, perhaps have turned away from him, or someone in our own family has left the church, Jesus still walks with us, and he walks with them. He never leaves us. But just like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, we can be so absorbed with what's going wrong that we don't see it. But this is the joy of the Easter message, that Jesus did not just share the suffering of these disciples on the road. He experienced the suffering at levels far beyond what most of us will ever experience. He knew what it was to suffer physically. He knew what it was to be rejected by those close to us. He knew what it was to lose face in the eyes of society. And Jesus showed us that when we walk through the cross, we reach the new life of the resurrection. Jesus still walks with us. For the disciples, well, we heard that they recognized him in the breaking of the bread. And that's why it's so important, my friends, for you and I to return here at least every week. Because sometimes we can be so absorbed in what has gone wrong in our own lives that at some moments we have to lift our eyes and see the bread blessed and broken by the one whose body was broken for us, whose blood was spilt for us. And we see his presence in the breaking of the bread, and we know that he continues to accompany us on the journey. The theme for this parish during both Lent and now in the Easter season is a closer walk. And that's what you and I are invited to. And it's not to go find Jesus so we can walk with him, but it's to recognize he's right there. There was a time in my life when I turned my back on my faith, as many times happens to young adults, we get distracted by things. But you know, when I turned back around, Jesus wasn't 100 miles away. Jesus was right there. Because even in my confusion, he never stopped walking with me. He was right there. So as we go forward with the joy of the Easter message, that is the promise. That is the hope. That is the real presence that Jesus has promised us, that he never stops walking with us. And so I learned two very important things from my dad. One, take a daily walk for your physical health. Well, I guess the corollary of that is my feet are still the best form of transportation. But the second is every day, take a closer walk with Jesus.